All right, good afternoon. I see we have a few people, number of people joining us here for this afternoon's seminar series. Our exciting, I believe, although I'm a little biased, seminar series entitled Adventures in Field Research, sponsored by Lincoln Memorial University's School of Mathematics and Sciences. Today, we are pleased to welcome Dr. Shea Tuberty from Appalachian State University, who's going to deliver a presentation called The Role of Adventure, Exploration, and Discovery in the Environmental Sciences, Why We Do It, and Why It's Good for You. Before I turn it over to Dr. Tuberty, I will make note that your microphones by default are muted. There'll be an opportunity to ask questions using the mics near the end. If you're afraid you will forget your question, you can take advantage of the chat option, and that way your question is preserved. So with that, I turn it over to Dr. Tuberty.
Just want to give a little shout out to a couple of my students from App State that have joined us. So I'm glad to see Niall there, a couple others, and some of our new faculty. So welcome, welcome. All right, let me see if I can get my screen up here for you. All right, so I just want to start off by saying thank you to Adam, Laney, and John for organizing this, I think, really interesting bent on a science seminar series, making it about the adventure that we feel and the exploration that we feel as well, and a sense of discovery in many cases. And that discovery can happen in a lab or in the field, but let's talk about field stuff, because we can go all the way back to, early years of human endeavor and the famous voyages that occurred that led us to where we are today and our knowledge of the earth. And so I think, at least for me, I'm going to kind of walk you through, if you'll endure with me a little bit of a biography, because I think the experiences I have accrued, are not unusual. And I think the two speakers we've seen already in the series had very similar experiences to myself. And that is, we owe a lot of our position today to our mentors, the faculty that introduced us to opportunities and made those things happen for us. And sometimes you just have to have somebody that wants to plan something and then invite you to come along. And that's like that first critical step in getting involved in field biology. So I know this is a crazy title. I don't love it, but I always try to put too much into my titles. But let's get started here. And this is one of my favorite places on earth. This is Milford Sound in the South Island of New Zealand. And a place I take my classes sometimes, but it's my favorite photograph that I've ever seen. So why is exploration important? Well, certainly it's, goes without saying that it leads to new ideas and discovery. And, I mentioned, voyages. Darwin's Voyage of the Beagle in the early 1800s is still one of the most influential explorations ever. But you could go through an entire course teaching just about famous explorers. That's probably a course I should teach one day, because when I was a kid, our TV broke. I was 7 years old. Our TV broke. My mom stuck it in the closet and said, let's go to the library. So once a week, we go to the library. Me and my brother and sister, we were all within 3 years of each other. And we come back with an armload of books. And we'd read them all week. And then we'd go back the next weekend, turn those in and get another set. And after doing that for many years, what I ended up focusing on were biographies of world explorers and biologists. And so I just had this encyclopedic knowledge of explorers and where they went and all this stuff. And I'll key you in on why that was so important to my future later. But so just know that young Shea Tuberty was reading a lot of these biographies and thinking about exploring the world. But, how do we explore today? Well, we have faculty here at App that are exploring by doing microbiology in caves. We have others that rappel down cliff faces and do cliff face ecology. Some of that work is over there by you guys, by the way, and some of the big river gorges that you've got in Tennessee. Myself, I got into scuba diving, and so exploring underwater. And certainly, the alvin, I had a book on marine biology and talked about the new species were being found constantly by the deep sea submersibles, which is still occurring today. We've only scratched the depths of, maybe 5% of the world's oceans. As far as the point I was making about why exploration and adventure might be good for you is that as long as you're connecting it with the outdoors, there's been a lot of recent effort to understand and define this nature deficit disorder. I think probably all of you might have heard of this. And it's simply the idea that students today, children today, spend more time indoors and online and playing video games than ever before. And what that's resulted in is a disconnect between human beings and their natural environment around them. And with that disconnect, I would argue that there's almost been a loss of a need for exploration or a seeking out adventure. And instead, you're doing it virtually rather than actually. So I found a few papers while I was going down the rabbit hole this week, putting the talk together on these really interesting bends on, what benefits can you measure in a teenager when you take them on a 9-day trek across a mountain? Completely separated from communications and computers. And what I circled down here at the bottom of the one on the right is that, as you would suggest, that outdoor education wilderness program fosters better mental health. People feel better about themselves. They have less anxieties. They feel freer. They're happier. And so a lot of times when I take my classes abroad, I don't make them leave their phones behind because they are really good cameras as well. And I want them to have memories. But the young lady that lost her camera or her phone on the first week of my recent class was the big winner, because it took 3 weeks before she stopped freaking out every moment about having lost her phone. We knew where it was, and they sent it back to her parents. But by the end of that 5-week trip, she actually knew what it was like to grow up like me, which is not subservient to every text and social media posting that you're being pinged with constantly. You're a slave to it. And she actually preferred her life without a phone. She didn't want to say it out loud to me, but she finally caved in on the last day on the way back home and admitted it. But I think there is a lot to be said, that connecting it. So I'm going to show this same slide after a few photo slides I'm going to show here. But one of the things I think that are really important in these influences of exploration and adventure is, what about our personal upbringing and experiences predisposes folks to be field researchers? I never grew up saying I want to be a biologist that works in the field. I didn't even know what that was, and when I chose to pick a college and a major, I chose biology because I was thinking pre-med, like so many others, right? But I spent every day playing in the river behind my house in Middle Tennessee, every day, flipping over rocks, playing underwater tag, building forts in the trees, going fishing, making rafts that sunk as soon as I put them in the water. Eventually, my parents got me a canoe that worked better, and just exploring every day. And every week or two, we'd push the limits of how far our parents wanted us to go, and we'd walk a little further. We'd find a little cave, and next time we'd bring a light so we could go into the cave. So it was just continual, incremental exploration starting from my house every morning. So I would argue that predisposed me to the idea of pushing boundaries, going to places I hadn't been before. I will remind you all those biographies I read. So I was reading about all these famous people that became famous solely because not only did they adventure to explore new places, they survived long enough to come back and share those stories. And that survival is going to be a big positive step towards making your mark for obvious reasons. But it's no joke sometimes you go these places. And how do field biologists get their starts conducting research? I'll pick on Niall because he's here and I can see him. But I've been pushing Niall to get involved in so many of the opportunities that are out there for students today that were not really available to me when I was an undergrad. At least if they were, I had no idea they did. But I still was able to piece together some experiences by impressing my professors with my interest in helping, just knocking on doors and say, what can I do? And I think at that point, I was at a school that had a lot of PhD students and postdocs there. And that was the focus of the faculty effort. The undergrads were kind of allowed to hang around and clean the cages and stuff, but really we weren't doing a lot of technical work. And we certainly weren't being, invited to do our own honors thesis or something. That didn't happen for me. But I did get invites to go on some really cool field research experiences. I think that those opportunities, literally getting your feet wet in my case, made all the difference. It just opened my mind to what is out there. How important are our parents and mentors to getting to that critical first part? I think my parents, at least my mother, my dad was a traveling salesman. He was gone during the week and showed up on weekends. But my mom was really impressively supportive for sciences. And some of my best friends that I've kept all my life remind me all the time of how my mom, Nancy Tuberty, who had 1 year college experience before she married my dad and began a Navy wife life for a while. I was a Navy brat for a little while. But she went out and bought these little golden guides. They were like $3-4 a piece, and they would have just real common animals that you could identify from the field samples. Every time I brought back something she was sure was a poisonous snake, she'd run out and get me a herp field guide, and we'd figure out that it's just a common water snake. It's not going to kill us. Okay, that's good. Well, next time the snake didn't look the same, and it was poisonous. So, but at least we knew that next time, right? So that went on with spiders, and then we went to birds, and then bugs and worms, and so. I had this cool little library of books, and all my friends knew about it. So every time they found something cool, they'd come to the Tuberty house to figure out what it was. Clue one, maybe you should be a field biologist. Why? Because your mom bought you some cheap books and made it happen for you. The mentoring goes without question. The professors that allowed me, that gave me opportunities by building those opportunities into my classwork and my field work and my labs were critical in my development. And it only took about 1.5 years before I gave up that whole idea of pre-med and started thinking about what I could do with this fieldwork stuff that was so fun. What I did every day for fun as a kid, these guys were saying I could make a living doing that. And then what role do exploration and adventure play in committing a biologist to field research? I think it's critical. For me, I seek it out. If I go to the same place a couple of times, I kind of get bored. I don't feel the sense of adventure anymore. I'm not exploring anymore. I've been there. I'm going to places I know exist. And more than that, I'll take the students. We don't even look around anymore. We just go right to the best scenes. We take a picture and we run to the next place. So you lose it if you don't go to new places. And so it's critical that you keep fresh places in mind and keep expanding that role you have for yourself and for those around you. As far as paying it forward, once I, checked off these first 4 boxes, I started thinking about, how am I going to include this love of adventure and exploration in what I do for my students. So of course I talk about it all the time, but then I build these courses, invite the students to sign up for them, and constantly change those courses so that they get to experience the new nuances of being someplace new with somebody else that hasn't been there first. So that's taking me out of my comfort zone a lot, and certainly they're there already. And then how do field researchers pass on their passion for field research? I don't know that. I don't know how you do that. Either it happens or it doesn't. Some of the students pick it up, and others, it's almost like it didn't happen. So you go on a 5-week trip to Australia and New Zealand. Some of them come back completely new people. They have redefined what they're going to do with their careers, and their excitement about travel and whatnot. Other folks, it was like, one of 25 trips they've taken like that or something, and didn't seem to have any impact. So I'm not really sure, but I just wanted to kind of put those ideas out there. So as I mentioned, my parents were, they're from Central Indiana. That's where my parents are from. And they got married. My dad got trained in the Navy in Pensacola and shipped off to Rota, Spain to join the NATO forces, where my dad was a communications officer. So I was born here on a little community near these beaches in South Central coastal Spain. And my sister was born there too. And when we were about 3.5 years old, I was about 3.5 years old, we moved to Iceland for the remainder of my dad's 5-year term. And then they moved back to Central Indiana. So, yep, that's where I was, that little blip in the middle. Literally, there's nothing around there. If you've been to these towns, they're kind of big, but where I was from, my parents were from, just tiny little train towns. They were train cities that the train would stop, put some water to make steam, and load up some more coal and probably some corn, because there was nothing but cornfields and hog fields, hog farms and cornfields everywhere where I grew up. When I was 11, my parents moved to Central Tennessee, and that's the river area in my neighborhood. Basically, it was a big horseshoe bend that surrounded my home, my neighborhood of 500 homes, great big subdivision built into the site of an old Native American tribal grounds. And so if you're digging in the backyard, making a garden, you'd often find arrowheads laying in there. And the river, the Harpeth River, was right there behind my house. So again, made it too easy not to go back there and fish and play every day. So the exploration idea for me was really important in my early days, because here I am stuck in the middle of nowhere, Indiana. And so reading all those books was my way to escape. Fast forward to my junior year in college, I get invited with my professor at Vanderbilt to go on one of his research trips. Now, he had this cool research project working on scorpions and spiders in the deserts of Baja. And the Sea of Cortez, of course, I knew about it from my readings, and knew it was an incredible place for marine biology. And that was kind of where I was leaning towards marine biology. So I jumped at the chance to meet up in San Diego, where my professor's family was from, join up with a group of Earthwatch folks, which was a way that anybody can pay a couple $1,000 and join a research team in a number of these different Earthwatch programs around the world. And so I was just one of the student technicians helping pull this program off. And he paid the $15 a day for my food. And I just spent, 10 hours, 12 hours a day doing research for him. And just had to pay my way to get to San Diego. So I drove out there, my first cross-country trip by myself, and met up with a few of my friends. And then we took these really horrific roads down through Mexico and then cut over to Bahia de Los Angeles. So right here is the bay that you're seeing behind me. And that big island right there is this one you can see off in the distance. So for weeks at a time, we would basically take a fishing boat out, get dropped off on these islands, and we would count scorpions and spiders on the different types of cactus and wherever we could find them, do transects along the beaches, looking for intertidal scorpions. Once in a while, the boat wouldn't come back and get you at the end of the day. So you'd have to spend the night out here on the island with no tent, no sleeping bag. So it would get chilly at night. And then you'd have all these rats crawling all over you, trying to look for food and stuff. Not the best night's sleep you'd ever get, but that only happened once, thankfully. But that's me at 20 years old, and had black hair, whole head of hair, young guy with his world, his whole life ahead of him. So that place turned out to be one of the most instrumental and influential places in my entire life, and because of that being that first experience for me. So that place is kind of just a small little fishing village. Nobody's ever heard of it really. And there was just this small little research station there that one of the community colleges in California had put down there. And Gary Polis was my professor. And these are showing some of the islands here in the, just off the coast. It'd take about 20 minutes to get out to these islands. And these are volcanic islands that were popping up due to they're right in the San Andreas Fault. So this is the southern extent of that earthquake zone of Southern California, created these little volcanic islands. Absolutely covered in seabirds, millions, literally millions of blue-footed and brown-footed boobies, all kinds of cormorants, pelicans, and then the sea was absolutely full of cetaceans, dolphins, whales, sharks of all types. You guys might have seen the underwater mountain or the underwater mount videos of the annual lekking of the hammerhead sharks. There's hammerheads, makos, threshers, all kinds of stuff going on there. Lots of fishing. And so pretty much fishing and tourism was the only thing going on there. And so I went back there 2 more times between grad school and after my first year of grad school to join Gary and his teams to do research down there. Went on El Nino years, went on regular years, night and day, nothing in the textbooks about it. But I got to witness stuff that I think very few people have ever seen. And to this day, I think I should write it up because I still can't find it in any of the textbooks. But um, that little kind of morbid note I made about survival is about Gary. So Gary was one of the most accident-prone people I'd ever met. And in my travels and classes, he took me to Australia, he took me to New Zealand, he took me all over the United States to go to field stations to do work of all types, including marine biology, invertebrate zoology, and general zoology. Everywhere we went, there was a story about him, climbing up in a tree to take a picture with, this giant curtain fig, famous tree in Australia in their tropical wetlands. And we're all in this tree taking a picture. All 20 people in the class are in the tree. The limb he's standing on breaks. He falls 20 feet and almost breaks his leg. He was hobbling the rest of the trip. We were waiting, quietly near a pond looking for platypus to come up, feeding in the morning. And a cow sneaks up behind him and eats the straw hat off his head. I could go on and on, these trips like that. Well, eventually caught up to Gary, unfortunately. And I don't mean to be glib about this. It was one of the most horrific things that ever happened in my life. And, Gary in 2000, March of 2000, was back there with a similar group that I was there with him, with Earthwatch, plus a couple of very famous Japanese ecologists. And some afternoon winds came up, made some 5-foot seas, and the small boats that we took out there to the islands flipped over, and everybody was dropped in the water, and eventually led to, Gary drowning. I think maybe he died of a heart attack first, but then drowned along with 3 of the Japanese folks because they couldn't swim. And the student researchers were able to swim to safety and end up in the island. But the end of that effort down there. And, I had never actually gone online to see what was written about Gary in those days, but I can say that the ecologists here at App State all knew Gary Polis very well because of some of the famous things he did while he was at Vanderbilt and then on to UC Davis, where he became the chair of that department there. But he was really famous for integral predation. And this is one of the reasons I bring that up is that he had all these hypothetical hypotheses about, animals that eat insects might eat each other once in a while. So integral predation. But he didn't really have a lot of hard and fast data to support it. But on the first day we got down to Baja, he said, I'll buy a case of beer for anybody that finds some hard evidence of this happening. And within 3 days, I had a photograph from one of those islands I got dropped off on and got stuck there all night. I had nothing better to do than just kind of keep looking around. I found a scorpion in a black widow web. And that was exactly what he was looking for. And so it might be the only proof he ever got, but I got that and a case of beer out of it too. So, but he also, when he finished his theories, his work, what he was working on was looking at the input of energy from the marine ecosystem onto land. And so he was doing some really crazy work, actually quantifying the amount of organic matter that was being deposited on these islands and on the beaches from the marine environment, and started a whole new theoretical framework for influences of marine and aquatic environments on terrestrial and vice versa. So really cool work. I'll just blast through these next couple of slides and get to my talk. But what I wanted to finish up with is that parents are very influential on our kids. And so where we drag our kids on vacations matters a lot, and how we take vacations matters a lot. So unfortunately for my little girls, who this older girl here, Kate, is now a freshman here at App State. So she's 18 now, and Niamh's 11. But, taking them on 5-week trips across the country where we basically just piece together a destination based on a friend lives in Denver. My brother lives in Montana. My cousin lives in Oregon. We just kind of piece together destinations and then find national parks and cool places to explore along the way. So, whether that exploring means exploring the universe or ancient history and paleontology, or just going to pretty places, or giving them a net and a nightlight and saying, head down the beach and see what you can find, right? And so this is a recent trip down to Florida, and I couldn't get them to go home. I mean, they just wanted to stay out there and explore. So you don't have to go around the earth in the Beagle to have adventure. You just have to be pointed in the right direction and given a little shove, and maybe, you know, some cool tech to support it. But my kids have been influenced their entire lives. And I think Kate started off as a psych major and quickly realized that she was out of her comfort zone and wasn't psyched about psych anymore, and has moved over to environmental sciences, and Dad couldn't be happier. So, you know, I have to think that she's more comfortable with that environmental focus because of things that she's just picked up on by being there and, you know, soaking it up constantly. This picture here, this is the Burgess Shale. So we actually hiked up on the Burgess Shale in the Canadian Rockies, and we're sifting through looking for new trilobites and new species in there and stuff. So again, exploration of paleontology, biology, marine biology happens all the time. So as far as how I put it into my coursework, I always make a field trip available if possible. Niall, did you get to go to the coast in your zoology class? Yeah. So I think Niall was pre-pandemic. So we actually got to take a trip to the coast. I do every fall, whatever class I'm teaching, we do this trip. And so it's happened maybe a dozen times, but most states have an association with a marine biology station. And so you can go out there and utilize their vessels for doing research and collections. And while we're there for 3 or 4 days, we're going to the, you know, the beaches, we're going to the different types of marine habitat, the estuarine habitat, to the marine labs where, you know, this is the Duke Marine Lab, where, you know, it's one of the top marine labs in the world. And, you know, learning how to basically be a fisherman, but also a very interesting and explorative way to figure out what's living out here in the bays, you know. So what's in that net? I mean, you sit around for an hour waiting for that net to come up. And when it does, you have no idea what's going to be in there. And then you just started digging through it. So that sense of exploration and finding what's there is kept alive in these types of field courses. If you've ever done field work, you know the importance of field grub. And I usually tell my students that I'm going to work you like a dog, but I'm going to feed you like a king. And so at the end of the night, you know, we go through all the edible things that are in there, all the shrimp and crabs and fishes, and we'll do a low country boil with the shellfish, and then the next day we'll fry it up. So we eat pretty good on these trips. And I think you can tell from the smiles on those kids' faces how much fun they're having. And then breakfast too. You got to send them off with a hearty breakfast. So, you know, cooking 3 pounds of bacon at one time in my double-handed skillet, and then cooking a dozen eggs, and then, you know, using the grill. So all this is, you know, done right there on the Institute of Marine Sciences field station. Getting into labs and watching these live animals that you've just captured, you know, mate and feed and move and swim and behave. You know, we go back in there in the middle of the night with all the lights off and use headlights to see them in their natural surroundings as best we can. And I try to make it a little adventure, a new adventure each time. So we'll take a boat out to the outer banks, or we'll take a ferry and take the van out there from the university and check that out. We've gone surfing. We actually caught the shark long lining sampling trip on a Tuesday last time. So we actually got to go shark fishing all day and look at, you know, the types of sharks that live out here in the bay, which was a really crazy experience I hadn't done either. So just creating that sense of wonder and whatnot. Years ago, we did a research project down in Costa Rica, and this was my first international research, and it brought me back to life. It'd been like 5 years since I came to App State, and most of the teaching I've been doing was here locally, except for that field trip I mentioned. So this was the first time I got to do a research project internationally again since being a student and doing that. So we did a big herpetology collection looking for the chytrid fungus impacts, which is wiping out, that's a pandemic of its own type, wiping out herp species around the world. But Costa Rica's got a rich herpetofauna, and so we got a great chance to go down there for 2 weeks and just work every night till 2 a.m. collecting all kinds of crazy species. This is the fertilance. This is the one that will put you down if you get bit. So this is the one that was 2.5 feet from me while I was trying to capture this guy. This guy was hunting right below me. I didn't even see it. My grad student actually grabbed me by the neck and pulled me back as he started striking. But nobody got hurt. barely, and saw all kinds of cool stuff. I'm an invertebrate zoologist, so this is the kind of thing that I like to see, these tailless whip scorpions and whatnot. But the sense of adventure you have to going new countries, the people you meet, the way their shops are set up, the communities you pass through are things that stay with you the rest of your life. And I think those influences, if you like it, you want to seek out opportunities to continue to do this. And science is one way you can. And by the way, someone else will pay for you to do it. So getting a grant will cover the costs of travel and food and the supplies to do it. So it's not the easiest thing to do, getting those grants, but it is an opportunity for making this kinds of thing happen. And a lot of times your university will have internal funds that will help pay for that. The other way you can do it is to offer courses. And so teaching courses in Australia, this is one of my first Australia trips back in 2010, where it's all exploration. And you are kind of an ecotourism buff when you come away from there. But this is the only place in the world where you've got two World Heritage Sites touching. So you've got the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of northeast Queensland, and the tropical wetlands here. This is the Daintree rainforest, the oldest rainforest on Earth, touching one another right here. So you can stand on the beach and be in both of those places. I'm sitting on Mount Sorrow, which was made famous by, so as the story goes, as Captain Cook ran aground trying to get off, trying to get back home to England, he ran aground and sunk his ship here. And they climbed up to this peak here to see where they were and try to find a way home. But those trips, the trips I take to Belize, where, we're basically snorkeling every day. Kids are so excited to see things like sharks and sea turtles. And one night we go out to one of the reefs and do a night snorkel around the reef for about 2.5 hours. Scares the hell and the bejesus out of the kids. But I keep track on them with the little, those little glow sticks in their snorkel bands, so I can figure out where they're at. And we put a big bonfire on the beach so they can come up for air and know where they're at. And so far, I haven't lost anybody, but awesome. It's all kinds of bioluminescence and giant fish and lobsters that come out at night from all their cricks and cracks. So I think a lot of these, things that I mentioned earlier are adequately explored when you build it into a class. And I think students will always want those types of offerings. They're going to flock to you. And the key is to make them affordable. And you make them affordable by camping a lot, cooking your own food, and doing a lot of the things that normally you'd pay someone else to do. And so that 5-week trip, you can actually recruit enough students to make it happen. But I think it's also important just to have opportunities right there where you guys are. So I know Lincoln Memorial is real close to some really beautiful rivers, the Clinch River and some ridges. And so there's all kinds of opportunities for lots of these things right there in your home backfield. And certainly that's true here in Boone as well. So I thought I'd finish up with just a quick overview of the type of research I'm doing currently. This is a presentation that we did for our global symposium on campus here at App State last fall. And is literally the master's thesis research of my recent student Grant Buckner. So we called this service learning through the lens of sustainability. You could also call it biomonitoring for water quality in a developing country of Belize. So Belize is a really fun country. They are used to American vacationers coming down there. They have, I think, an even better reef than the Great Barrier Reef. And they've got this great byline there, you better believe it. So this is about conservation issues and water quality in Belize, a place where I have been taking my students. And so I made some connections recently with some scientists that are in Belize that, and this is the guy I'm talking about right here. This is Dr. Ed Bowles, who is basically focused on water quality and conservation issues using bioindicators like fish and invertebrates, similar to what I'm doing here in North Carolina. So during this trip, I made connection with him. I built this research collaborative and then recruited Grant out of UC. He was at an undergrad at UNC Asheville and had just taken a class in bioindicators and aquatic insects and knew how to key them out. So I put him on his first international flight and sent him down to Belize. And again, the exploration while you're doing these research projects is constant. And so we tried to visit 46 sites while we were there. We only got to 31 because some of the streams had dried up. Well, I guess we went there. They just weren't sites we could actually collect. And basically, we just filled our baskets with all of the local market food and took advantage of any kind of a zoo or a place to explore nearby our sites, and then, you know, kind of melded that into our research efforts. So like many places around the world, conservation issues are a constant challenge in developing countries, along with the United States and developed countries. And if you need a place to go where climate change is turning the world on its head, go to Belize. You go there in the dry season and it's raining. You go during the wet season and it's in drought. They had to move their capital city away from the coast 60 miles inland because it was getting hammered by hurricanes so often. And so they have serious water issues there, a lot to do with their agricultural practices. So they are, the land in Belize is largely owned by international prospectors that bring in, you know, industrial farming, but basically leaves the country with contaminated water or no water. And so that's a serious issue there. And being a developed country, they haven't diverted enough money to develop their capabilities to protect their water quality. So a lot of what we were doing there was just helping build capability in the Department of the Environment so that they could actually monitor their water quality. And what came to a kind of a big peak in the last year is that they've had so much eutrophication, so much anoxia, that the fish kills have started to wipe out rivers entirely, largely in part because of this climate change issue I mentioned earlier. And this is what happened. We had a crocodile kill for the very first time in world history that I am aware of. So I went to the World Toxicology Conference last year and spent the entire time trying to find somebody with a story as interesting as a crocodile kill. Nobody came close. So that occurred because the water got so nasty that even the bacteria community changed and started releasing all kinds of sulfides from an anoxic river there. So they have a Morlitz crocodile found nowhere else than outside of Belize, Central America. This is a little baby one I was really willing to catch in the middle of the night in a canoe trip in the middle of nowhere. But there were bigger ones there too. And they actually lost a huge population of these in the New River due to this anoxia. It's caused a lot of public outrage. They're starting to organize themselves and renewed interest by the government to do something about it. So led to collaborative with Dr. Ed Bowles. And so it's taken us 2 years, actually now third year, to pull all the resources together within Belize. For the very first time, they had a permitting process. We were the first to get the permits. That was horrendous, but Ed helped us get through it, and largely because a lot of his students actually run those ministries now. He's been there for 25 years, and he's originally from Mississippi, by the way. So he's an American expat that's there. So Belize is beautiful. It's not I don't think I need to go into this. It's if you've never been there, it's a 3-hour direct flight from Charlotte to get down there. It's really easy. They speak English. They love Americans. It's safe enough if you stay outside of the big cities. And if you're into ecotourism, they're all about it down there. But what we did is focused our work in the largest river of Belize, which is the Belize River. And it takes up about 40% of the land cover of Belize. So we focused on this as the largest watershed, and Grant went down there 3 times to collect within this watershed. As I mentioned, he hit about 31 sites and developed the country's first biomonitoring protocol, standardized protocol, and now has a way of actually creating a scoring technique for the quality of the water based on the assemblage of aquatic insects there. So I'm kind of running down low on my time. I'm sorry I spent too much time talking about the fun part of this conversation, but I don't want to cut the project short, because we were in the mountains, we were at the near the sea, so we were at the highest elevation places in Belize near the Guatemalan border, all the way down to, I think, within 3 miles of the coast. where you've got salt water intruding into the freshwater habitats there due to climate change. But when we were picking our sites, we had 46 in mind. We only did 31 of them. One of the reasons is the common reasons is that the rivers were often dry during the dry season, but impossible to sample during the wet season. They're just too high and muddy. But some of them were really unsafe because as soon as we got there, the first thing that happened is a crocodile dove in the water. So we just said not going to go there. So we just would move on to the next site, try to find something a little safer. We collected all the basic water quality parameters using a handheld data sonde, and then did kick nets and dip nets and visual collections around rocks and submerged woody debris, and collected all the aquatic insects we could, and then identified them down to genus and species, which this project could not have happened 2 or 3 years ago because we just came up with a new neotropics key to aquatic insects. So literally you couldn't have done it before that. And then we'd find a place to set up a makeshift lab. We took all our own scopes down there in big travel boxes and spent the entire night extracting chemicals from the water so that we could do some analysis on that and also keying out bugs. So we ended up with 5,500 aquatic insects from 151 different taxa, 56 families, 120 genera, and almost 40 new records of aquatic insects for the country of Belize from this 1 3-week period over Christmas break last year. So we're really excited about what this one little effort has done, and we're continuing to, I'm going to keep pushing my grad students towards this into the future. The rest of the talk is kind of boring because it's the technical aspects of what you do with aquatic insects to make a scoring technique from it. But it's very similar to the North Carolina or Tennessee TDEC technique for water quality monitoring based on aquatic insects. The US EPA does it. Every state in the union does it. Belize did not until now. So they've actually gotten very excited about this collaboration. They've created a new branch of the Ministry of the Environment on biomonitoring. And the minute I can travel again, the moratorium has been lifted on travel by my university. I'll be heading back down to Belize to start setting up workshops, to start training in-country biologists so they can start continuing this work on their own. So I'm gonna stop there. I know I've got more slides, but I'm kind of infamous for putting more slides in my talks than I can get through. But there's lots of little fun stories in there. Let me just stop here and open up for questions, and maybe I could slip another slide in to answer a question if that is convenient. Should I stop sharing so people can see each other? That tends to help, I think.
I'll kick off the questions here. I'm curious, in the beginning of your presentation, you talked a bit about the influence and the impact that these types of experiences can have on students, but there may be little data to indicate how a professor or researcher passes on this excitement and can be life altering. Do you have any anecdotal evidence or any just personal thoughts about how that that transference can happen?
Well, Adam, that couldn't have been a better segue into the slides I didn't get to. So I'm jumping back into my talk, and I'm doing exactly what I thought I might. So at the end of this talk, the undergrad that went along on this trip, so I took Grant, I mentioned Grant, my grad student, but we also took Jasper Yoke. Jasper is kind of a character in our department. Everybody knows Jasper. He's just one of these guys that's just incredibly energetic and just high on life. And this guy he hiked the AT when he was 18 years old. So after he finished his high school senior year and jumped on the trail early June or late May and through hiked the Appalachian Trail, lost 80 pounds while doing that. So he was morbidly obese when he started, and now he's fit and trim. You'd never know it. And on his hike, met a wealthy businessman who was so impressed with what Jasper was doing, gave him a $3,000 scholarship to travel internationally somewhere. So he chose to join my research team in Belize, and he used his money to do and come along with this. And so these last 3 slides are his slides that he put together for our presentation to the Global Symposium here on campus. So his responsibilities were to do the filtering of the water. So he would take a liter of water and then force it through this giant syringe with a caulk gun that would force the water through these little set-pack columns. You scientists might know about these solid phase extraction columns. So we would extract all the toxins from the water doing that. And then I sent them down to the University of Florida for LCMS analysis, untargeted analysis, to see what types of toxins were in the water. But while he was in there, while he was there for those 3 weeks, gained all kinds of experiences. His first international trip, his first opportunity to practice his Spanish. And, he's having, camped for, the entire summer in fall when he did the Appalachian Trail, was really good at falling right in with what we needed to do to make ends meet on our trip. And the last slide, in this slide here, this was his favorite part, was just getting to know the locals. So many times we'd have a stream site on a map, but we didn't know how to get there. So we were constantly stopping on the side of the road and just asking a local, where is this creek? And it often led to people letting us onto their private property to get access to the creek. And then they would jump in the water and start helping us. And that happened multiple times. And I've never met people that were more excited about water quality than the people in Belize. And it's because they know that they have serious issues that if they don't address soon, it's going to be too late. So this was a great example here. Jasper and Miguel hit it off, and they were working together. I got a couple of shots of them doing some work. And then Miguel jumps on his motorbike and disappeared and came right back and said, "My wife wants you guys to come to dinner." So we got invited to their little house for dinner, and he had this beautiful wife and child, and just spent the afternoon talking about what's going on there. And turns out he used to be an ecotourism guide, and now he's into farming. And anyway, he's just getting to know the people there is a big part of the travel and the exploration. And in the end, if you don't meet the people, you're really missing out. And so that was one of Jasper's favorite thing. And in Belize, everybody eats stewed chicken. And they've got this amazing spice blend that they use. It's really unique. It's totally something that Belize owns. And when we got back, Jasper went out and found a place to buy it online and got his own Belizean, stewed chicken spice mix. And he's been making it for himself lately. And he loved the chance to explore. So like I said, anytime we were near a wild animal facility or a zoo, we stopped and made time for that. We got into a couple of archaeological sites, which are all over. Belize is the heart of the Mayan archaeological sites. And so we went to Zenancinich and spent the afternoon, got a quick guide, and spent a couple hours touring this, fascinating facility and just learning more about their culture. One morning, one of the sites we were collecting was at a famous birding community area in this big freshwater wetland that was constantly inundated with people from around the world coming there to go birding. So we got up crack of dawn and jumped on one of the birding boats and spotted over 100 species in 2 hours. Now, if you're a birder, you should be going, what? Yes, it was incredible, and all kinds of endemic species, just super rare stuff, all kinds of things. And for you ecologists, you might have learned about the snail kite, which is this huge eagle-like hawk that eats snails, but big snails. This is the snail right here. We were watching them hunt snails all day long. Incredible that a bird of prey that large would eat invertebrates, and they're perfect at it. But it also scratched some of his other itches. He's totally into rocks. He's been collecting rocks with his mother his whole life. And I could not get him to focus on the biology because he just kept picking up rocks and filling up the trunk of my car, this rental car we had, with rocks. And then he'd spend the whole evening showing me these rocks and then telling me why it was so cool. So he was totally into the rocks. So yeah, I think back to your question, Adam, anecdotally, students absolutely love it. The student evaluations after the courses I teach abroad are not just, yes, I liked it, or checking off a box. They go on and on and on about what they got out of it. And it's why I do it. And, the logistics of putting these trips together is more and more complicated. Back in the 80s when we went, hardly any regulations in Australia. When you go back now, it's incredible. You can't sneeze without somebody, covering your face and wiping it off and then, sterilizing the whole community. It's very intense these days, but it's still worth doing it. And I think maybe 5 people out of the 35 in my department do it. So it's becoming more and more rare as well. So for you students, the word on the street is take advantage of it while you can. Does that kind of answer your question, Adam? I guess it's kind of what I think I was shooting for there. So let me get out of this as well. That was the whole talk, by the way. So I got to the rest of the talk. Any of you undergrads have a question about the importance of adventure and doing field research? Can you share an experience already, Niall or Stephen or Melanie and the rest of you guys?
I'll definitely say that the experience when we went to Coast was definitely life-changing for me. It wasn't overseas, but it was definitely one of the most memorable experiences I ever had, especially when we went out and catch sharks, being outside. And for me too, being hands-on and being outside in the environment is the best way for me to learn. So I feel like out of any class, any experience I've ever had as far as just being in the university period, that's definitely the one I've learned the most and definitely enjoyed the most. I still talk about it all the time. I told people stories about when we were swimming across that channel and then just exploring the island, seeing the wild horses, collecting shells, and then going back into going back into the house and then looking at sea urchins under the microscope. It was just mind-blowing experience. It was so great, and it was super cheap. Best break I've ever had.
Yeah, we didn't really pay for food, did we? So I think maybe I took up a little collection, but yeah, I love the food. I keep coming back to that. It's one of the reasons I do that field trip.
All right, one last chance for questions.
I wonder if you could speak a little bit to the impact that these courses have. Certainly, I think for the students that are maybe already leaning towards, adventure, conservation, field biology, you kind of get them out and you see them immediately light up. And it gives them this feel, I mean, like I had when I was in college of, oh, you can do this as a job, like amazing. But also I find as, someone teaching these classes that sometimes really small movements from the students who would not normally connect are really important. So, students who, especially I'm a herpetologist, so they come in and they're terrified of catching, a snake or a turtle, and they don't, maybe they take one class and they don't go on. This isn't their passion, but, I had a student who, when I put out s'mores, stuff for s'mores, that is, he didn't know he didn't know because he literally had never been camping in his life, not even car camping. Yeah. So I'm sure you have a lot of those stories too, where maybe it's someone who's just an econ major and they're just taking one course or have one experience, but.
Well, even the cell and molecular side of the department, when you said one course, for our multiple tracks, if you're a cell and molecular track person, you have to take one field course. And a lot of them, one ecology type course. And a lot of them choose environmental science, which is a 3-hour class without a lab. So they cheat themselves out of that one lab class they might have gotten where they actually have to pile into a van and go out in the woods. Why would you cheat yourself of that? But you said something, Rachel, that 2 things actually. So for the kids that never considered that type of biology, and they're only a biology major because, like I was, pre-med, it's like that was what drew me to the degree. Not knowing all these other things are actually the things I love doing my entire life are actually trajectories towards being the perfect person to take care of the rivers. So why do I do water quality and ecotoxicology? Because the river I grew up in playing every day, I watched it die over my lifetime. It's almost completely dead now. It's got one of the biggest bedroom communities for Nashville, Tennessee in it now. It's enormous. The freshwater mussels died off while I was in high school. I came back for Christmas break and there was a raw sewage spill in the river that it caused a complete fish kill. So I went back there and just saw, bass and carp and stuff catfish floating down the river dead. And I've talked to the director of the Tennessee Department of Environment Conservation on a one-on-one during a lunchtime break I had during a conference. And he knew my neighborhood really well. because it's one of the wealthiest neighborhoods, not my neighborhood, but just that wealthy community around Nashville has the money to put towards conservation. And he's trying some new things in that river. And I was really jazzed to hear that. But you're back to your point, those first steps to opening up the window to possibilities are really critical. So I think for the non-majors biology classes, the non-majors classes we have in our gen ed curriculum, the students that are in there are not biology majors, obviously, or any kind of science major. And they think that we're there to recruit them to biology. And I swear on a stack of Bibles, that's not what I'm doing. I'm just trying to do my job, which is teach them some science so they can make good decisions later in life. But about 3 to 5% of them do convert to biology because of the window of experience that you can give them. And they realize, well, I love hiking. I love playing, checking, making bird lists or trying new vegetables and, whatever, anything. So I agree with you that maybe that's more important than singing to the choir, I guess that's what you're saying. But the other thing you said that sparked my interest was s'mores, the power of s'mores. Let me tell you guys something. My wife came along to our last trip to Australia, and she was trying to add some, mom kind of things to the course experience. And she went into one of the stores and was able to piece together the makings of s'mores, because they don't do that in Australia. They don't make s'mores there. So, but she was able to find some really big, she went to a pastry shop and got the graham crackers. She went to another store and found some marshmallows, and then, chocolate wasn't hard. And then she stashed that away and didn't tell anybody. And we got out in the middle of nowhere where we were definitely going to be feeding ourselves, and the food kind of got monotonous. And one night around a bonfire, she pulls out the makings for the s'mores. And we happen to be in the outback where there's just, all kinds of macropods bouncing around everywhere and all kinds of cool snakes and dangerous shit every place. It's awesome. But, and we're doing night hikes, finding scorpions and everything. But the big bonfires would attract people from other campgrounds that were, international folks. So we had people from all over the world around this bonfire. We pulled out the s'mores, and we made friends so fast. And the students realized that, this little treat that they called s'mores, all of these people had heard about the world famous s'more, but had never experienced one. And so they were so excited, and it made sense when it happened, but I didn't see it coming. So never underestimate the power of the s'more. It's critical that you understand.
That's great. Thank you.
You can pull people together. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Rachel, because it's in that experience, the other things you take for granted, hiking and backpacking. Growing up in Middle Tennessee, my folks never had any money. So I told you, my dad was a traveling salesman. He sold business paper. So he was a paper salesman. That's like a joke somewhere. But on weekends, we would go over to the Smoky Mountains and backpack all over the Smokies. So those are my formative teenage years. Were hiking all over that. I still love doing that. But there's a lot of folks, back to the nature deficit disorder, a lot of folks that don't have those experiences. And even getting dirty during a field biology class is something that stretches them. You know what I'm saying? They don't have the shoes to wear to go out in the field. They're wearing high heels, or they're, flip-flops and, things that are not going to protect their feet. So those shared experiences that a lot of us take for granted, students often get from these field trips. And I think your point is really a good one.
Well, thank you, Dr. Tuberty. I can think of no better way than to cap off today's meeting than talking about s'mores. So I do want to take a few moments to thank everyone for tuning in with us today. I want to thank Dr. Tuberty for providing just an excellent presentation and sharing his adventures and insight with respect to field research and the benefits. And want to thank Lainey and John, that if it were not for them too, this seminar series would never make it to fruition. So they do all the work that makes this possible. So thank you, Lainey and John. And I do want to put in a short little plug, ask you to invite a friend to register yourself for next week's talk. It's the same time next Wednesday, February 3rd. where we'll have Dr. Steve Stevenson from the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville, and he's going to give a presentation about the subantarctic Macquarie Island, a scientific adventure of a lifetime. And I also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Lincoln Memorial University, or the School of Mathematics and Sciences, or check us out on Instagram to see what's up. So thank you, Dr. Tuberty. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We hope to see you and your friends back next week. So thank you.